All right, we are live. Let's see if we have, oh, I'm going to need this. Let's see if we have any watchers yet. It's going to be a fun one. People should watch. Also, we only went a few seconds ago, so I guess I can wait.
Patience.
Right. Why? Slept weird. Hello, is anybody there? I know it's a really nice Saturday, so I may not get a lot of people today. And also, I totally forgot to post about, hey, this is happening, so that could be why. We have one person! Hi, whoever's watching! We're so excited! 3 people, woohoo! Oh, 6 people, sweet! We're getting more people! So exciting. Cool, we'll give it like 10 more seconds. So we've been on for a minute, and then we'll start. Welcome to ZooMontana's Facebook Live, friends. We're super excited you're here. 8 people, woohoo! Hi, do I get started? Yee! All right, my friends, welcome again to ZooMontana's Facebook Live. I'm Miss Katie.
And I'm Miss Emily.
And we are super excited that you are here today. We have actually a really interesting Facebook Live today that I hope you guys will appreciate and enjoy, just like we are excited about it. But before we even get started, I wanted to let you know about a really cool opportunity that we have coming up. So, we have been working really closely with a group called Skype in the Classroom, and they work globally to bring educators and science and museum and all sorts of authors to people around the globe with really cool virtual field trips. And we're actually doing a live event with Skype in the Classroom on May 27th, not March 27th. So it's not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. So you can log in at 10:30. And then our program will start at 11. Super fun, super cool. It'll be really fun. And it'll be with people all over the world. So definitely check it out. We'll have a post after this program, this live program right here. We'll have another post on our Facebook telling you all about it, and we're super excited for it. Now, today's live here on Facebook is actually about National Invasive Species Awareness Week. There we go. So really cool and interesting concept. So we're going to talk about invasive species this week. But first, Emily has something for you.
Oh, is it my song?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I'm not functioning at top capacity. But invasive species are plants and animals that aren't supposed to be here. Okay.
So we're going to talk about what an invasive species is, how it's different from what's called a non-native species. We're also going to give you some examples on how it can be plants and animals, or both, that can be invasive or non-native. We also have a ton of really cool links to share with you. I'm going to put them in the chat here. And then I'm going to let Miss Emily tell you what it is.
All right, so I'm sure many of you guys have heard the term invasive species before. It's actually something that's used widely throughout a lot of media platforms and even in like high school science classrooms. So what is an invasive species? An invasive species is an organism, plant, animal, bacteria that is non-native to an environment. And it has a tendency to cause negative or detrimental effects on this environment that it's not native to. And these negative effects can impact the economy, they can impact the environment, and they can impact human health. So it can be one of those 3 or a combination of any of the 3. Now, invasive species are a really big deal. Approximately 42% of all animals and organisms across the globe that are either listed as threatened or endangered by the IUCN are threatened or endangered because of invasive species in their native habitat. So these invasive species can really wreak havoc on native organisms that live in the environment where these invasive species are present. Now, there's invasive and there's non-native. And invasive species, they are bad. Anything that they do in an environment has a negative effect on it somehow. Non-native species, when they're introduced into an environment, either have a neutral effect, meaning that the environment doesn't really care whether or not that species is there or not, or they might have a positive effect. So invasive and non-native don't mean the same thing. They're not interchangeable. They refer to very different organismal interactions within an environment. And today we're going to be focusing specifically on the non-natives. So organisms that do damage to either the environment, the economy, human health, or a combination of the 3. So how exactly does an invasive species become invasive? How do they get from point A to point B? How does this happen, Katie?
So it depends on where the animal's from and how they move through an environment. One of the most common things that's known here out in the West and actually across most of the United States is the zebra mussel. Tiny little clam-like animal that usually is in the ballast water of a ship or a boat, even just a small boat. They are really small, but they tend to have big colonies, and so they can be on a rudder, they can be all up in the engine, just on the side, kind of like a barnacle. And when someone, takes their boat out and then goes to the next stream, they can fall off, or they can lay I think they actually lay eggs or something similar to that, their offspring. They just release it into the water, and actually really dangerous that way. Another thing that they can do, actually I have a cool statistic for you, is estimated that 5,000 to 10,000 species are traveling across the world in ballast water at any given time. So that's a lot of species that are traveling in the water of in a ship or on small boats or anywhere in between. So that's one way that happens for sure. Another way is traveling plants across the world. So whether you have bananas on a boat that's traveling to another continent or even just on a truck across to another state. Animals climb up in trees, and that includes spiders and snakes, and they get stuck in the boxes, or they're hiding in a bunch of bananas, and they get put into a box, and now they're in another state. So oftentimes when that happens, the animal just dies, whether it's in transit or whether it's in that wherever it ends up, because it's not a suitable environment. But that's not always what happens. And if there's enough of them that come across in the perfect environment, then that's when an invasive species becomes problematic. Now, another way is that people release their pets into the wild, which is not a great thing. We have a website over here in our comments. It's called Don't Let It Loose, and tells you how to be a responsible pet owner. We're going to talk about a really bad invasive species here in the United States because it's nearly positive it's from people just letting loose an animal they don't want. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And another big thing is climate change. With climate change happening, it changes the rainfall patterns, and it changes the all sorts of weather patterns across the world. And so that's allowing a lot of plant and animal species to expand their ranges, which is not necessarily initially a bad thing, but if it's competing with rare or endangered species or completely changing an environment, that's when it becomes a problem. So we're going to talk about that, what traits actually make an invasive species successful compared to what is in that area.
Awesome. All right, so before I go into that, good morning, Joanne. I hope you're having a nice Saturday. So invasive species have a bunch of characteristics that make them invasive. So one of these characteristics is they have to be able to reproduce super, super quickly. So these tend to be animals that will have short interbirth intervals, which is basically meaning a short amount of time between breeding seasons, and they will make multiple offspring, hundreds of thousands potentially of offspring. Another characteristic is they have no natural predators. So a lot of invasive species become invasive because they're introduced or brought into an area where the ecosystem hasn't evolved a predator to control that species. So many ecosystems across the globe, in fact, are controlled by predators. Predators are a key for keeping ecosystems and organisms in check. And they're, evolved to keep in check the native organisms to that ecosystem. And when you bring in a new one, those predators aren't necessarily, like, hey, what the heck is this? I don't know how to deal with this. And so there's nothing that's going to kill this invasive species or control its population. So another one that we've kind of already talked about is they have to harm the environment or human health or the economy in some sort of way. So they have to do some sort of detrimental damage. And they have to be able to adapt quickly. So like Katie said, in transit, when you have, say a tarantula in a box of bananas coming from Central or South America up into Florida or something like that, for that tarantula to become an invasive species, it's got to be able to adapt to that Floridian environment extremely quickly. If the organism cannot adapt, likely it's just going to perish, and then you don't have the invasive species problem. So invasive species have to reproduce quickly. They have to do some sort of negative damage to either human, environmental, or economic health. They have to have no natural predators, or they have to, what was the other one? Crap. I can't talk. I can't function. So they have to be able to adapt. They have to reproduce quickly. They have to do some sort of harm. And lastly, they have to kind of outcompete native species. So there has to be some, or either equally compete or completely outcompete. And this happens a lot with grasses and plants. It can also happen with fish species. That's also super common. invasive competitive thing, and they can potentially even outcompete the native species for food and just decimate populations.
Now, a note here, invasive species aren't evil, right? They're not doing this to invade and get rid of everybody. They just happen to be adapted to a particular environment, and because of their home environment, they're better suited to it than maybe the current populations, for whatever reason. So it doesn't mean that these animals or these plants are coming in intentionally trying to wipe out, humans, or human ecosystems, human health, whatever it is. They're not intentionally doing this. This is usually because humans are accidentally introducing these things, and it just so happens that their survival is really working in this area. So that's an important thing to remember when you're thinking about invasive species. Now,
these have agendas.
Yeah, they don't have an agenda.
I'm going to mess this ecosystem up. Like, no, they're not doing that.
Yeah, so a major example of that is actually zebra mussels. So we talked about that a little bit earlier, and they're native to the Black Sea and the Caspian Seas in Europe, and they were accidentally introduced into the Great Lakes area in the late 1980s. Again, ballast water of a ship. Now, it was first reported here in Montana in 2016, and they cluster, like I said, in large colonies on hard surfaces, which can wreck boats. And also, they take in certain nutrients that the other animals around them need, which was why they're invasive. They also reproduce faster, and they can cause, in 1 year alone, $234 million of damage just in Montana. They've only been here for 4 years, not even, and they've already caused that much per year. So that's why they're considered invasive here in Montana. Oh, thank you, Rhonda. That's so nice of you. We're trying to be well-informed here, because again, it's important to see all different sides of it. So now she's going to tell us about a couple others.
So there's two more that I want to talk about in Montana alone, and then we're going to bring out some live critters that we have that either represent invasive species elsewhere in the world or are invasive species elsewhere in the world. So one of the organisms in Montana that I want to talk about is the emerald ash borer, which is this super pretty bug. It's like this iridescent, shiny emerald green. They're very, very pretty. However, they are detrimental to ash tree populations. So these guys are native to Asia, and they actually were introduced into the States by coming into Michigan in 2002, which is my home state. So yeah, my home state was like, hey, we got these weird bugs that are eating all of our ash trees. This is just stellar. And then from there, it spread throughout the United States. And these guys are detrimental to ash trees, particularly when they're in their larval stage. So the females will lay their eggs in ash trees, and then the larvae will bore the emerald ash borer. They'll bore into the ash trees to get nutrients and all that kind of stuff they need before they metamorphosize into a full-grown adult. Now, the last one that I want to talk about for Montana is the American bullfrog, which is a fairly common frog that you will see in the eastern United States. It's a call that I'm sure many of you guys that are watching are familiar with. It's like the classic, swampy forest call, in cartoons and kid shows and all that kind of stuff. So these guys are native to the southeastern and eastern United States, found, I guess, in the Yellowstone River Valley, first in 1999. Thought that they were brought here for pest control or hunting. People eat frog legs, or even as pet release. And these guys are amazing eaters. They will eat anything. They love to eat. They have huge mouths. And so as a result of this voracious appetite, they are just wrecking native amphibian populations in the Yellowstone Valley and throughout Montana, which is a huge problem.
They're also a big frog, too.
They're also huge. I am, scared of them. They're too big.
Too big.
So, yeah. American bullfrog, emerald ash borer, and the zebra mussel are three invasive species that you'll find within Montana and in other states throughout the U.S. All of these have been introduced by people in some way, shape, or form.
Now, another part of that in Montana and throughout the Mountain West, it's not just animals that are invasive. Plants are actually more common invasive just because there's so many types of plants. And, plant populations do change throughout ecosystems, but one that you're probably very familiar with if you're from anywhere in the Mountain West, or maybe even in the Midwest, is cheatgrass. It is a very interesting grass. The reason it's called invasive is because of its life cycle. Cheatgrass grows faster and earlier in the season than most other native grasses, and then it dries really quickly. And that's where it's annoying for humans, right? Because then it sticks in your socks and in your shoes, and it rubs, and it's not very fun. But cheatgrass, because of that, it dries earlier in the season, creates a big fire hazard. Also, cheatgrass plants are more fire resistant, so not only do they create a fire hazard, but they're more likely to survive if a fire comes into the ecosystem, and then they'll just reseed and outcompete a bunch of native plants. So animals are not the only one that are invasive. Another one that we actually watch here at the zoo, this poster was made by Mary Alice, one of our wonderful volunteers, and she is really focused on trying to get rid of the Hounds Tongue, which is a really interesting plant. It's got some spurs on it. It's very hard to get out of fur. It's poisonous to cattle and sheep. It's not good for sheep because it sticks in their wool and you have to literally cut it out of the wool. So it's not a very good plant, and obviously we don't want to have to, get into the wolf enclosure and try to get out of their fur, or into the Wolverine enclosure here at the zoo. So that's actually something really local right here. It's at ZooMontana that we are trying to eradicate because it's an issue for us here. Okay, now elsewhere in the world there are lots of invasive species, and again they can be on the same continent, in the same country, and just be invasive in a certain environment, or they can be animals like the cane toad, which if you've watched our amphibian Facebook Live, you probably remember her. Her name is Cheech. She's adorable. She's really cool. She's also super invasive in Southeast Asia and in Australia, and even starting to come into the United States as well. So cane toads, as you might be able to guess by their name, eat cane beetles in sugarcane fields. It's a pretty fun little easy way to name them there. Now, they are a really big toad. They don't have a lot of problems in their native areas because of animals that can eat them, right? But when people started to grow sugarcane in Southeast Asia and in Australia, they're like, hey, I have a bunch of beetles that are eating my cane and I need to get rid of it. So, oh, hey, South America has a bunch of really cool toads. Let's just bring those over and set them loose so they eat the cane beetles. Well, they also started eating almost anything else, kind of like the American bullfrog. They like to eat a lot of other things, including native bugs, native amphibians, native snakes and lizards, native birds, and they are also don't have many predators because they're poisonous. Cane toads excrete a very milky-looking substance that's pretty toxic to most animals, including a lot of mammals. So for right now, they're extremely invasive in Australia and a lot of other places because nothing else can eat them. So again, those 4 characteristics of an invasive species, they're causing harm to native species. They adapted to that area really fast and really well. They breed really quickly, and they don't have many predators. So that's what makes her an invasive species. She's still a really cool toad, right? Really interesting animal, interesting toxins in her body. And in her native environment, she's got a normal amount of population. It's just in the spaces where she's been introduced by people that she is taking over the world. Now, again, this is not a unique thing. Humans have put out or have introduced species into random places for a lot of reasons. In New Zealand, they brought rabbits over because rabbits make for good meat and good fur, and it's an easy thing. But rabbits started eating all the native plants, and then rabbits did what rabbits do, and rabbits got really abundant in New Zealand. So like, all right, we need to bring over the stoat, which is a weasel-type animal, to take care of the rabbit population that was outgrowing. And the stoats are a carnivore that eat almost everything. In New Zealand, there's a lot of endemic or native animals that don't fly, have very few predators, so they don't know what to do. Those populations are also being decimated because the stoat weasels are they're like, oh, well, rabbits are like okay to catch, but this bird can't fly and can't move very fast. It's so much easier to go after. So there's a lot of consequences for introducing these things. So it's called biocontrol. And there's only so much control we find out that we're having. Shocking, I'm sure. But they're still a cool animal. Again, it's just in their own context. We don't want to be introducing them into places where they shouldn't be. Okay? Now, our next animal is something that Emily's going to talk about because it's super amazing. Okay, so say goodbye to Cheech.
So this animal, I don't know if there's technically enough research on it to call it invasive. So we're going to probably just call it not native for this segment, but it could easily become invasive. So for any adults watching, I'm sure you're familiar in the media with the infamous drug lord Pablo Escobar. So when he was at the peak of his activity, he had a huge house with this really impressive menagerie of exotic animals. One of these exotic animals was the African hippo. And so when he was caught and when law enforcement agencies stormed his compound, they didn't really think to hey, let's get these animals out of here. So one of the animals that they was like, hey, we're going to just kind of leave it be, was this African hippo. And hippos are large and hippos are strong. And with, no maintenance and care, the hippo enclosures eventually crumbled and broke down, and hippos do what hippos do, and hippos went to go find the nearest water source. And so in the jungles of Colombia, you have these populations of African hippos, which is like, I think that's so crazy. They haven't, it's the jungles of Colombia are dense and remote and super hard to navigate, so not a lot of research, to my knowledge, has been done on the effects that these hippos are having in the environment. So just because I'm not sure, for the purpose of this, I'm going to call them non-native as opposed to invasive. But that's an example of a very strange and unique and large pet that shouldn't be a pet in the first place. Yeah. Being released into an environment where it's going to do super well. Hippos live throughout sub-Saharan Africa, including in the jungles. The jungles of Colombia are like a heaven for them, and there's so much foliage for them to eat, and there's so much water there. So yeah, fun fact, there are African hippos in the jungles of Colombia.
And thinking about those 4 things that make it invasive, right? So they have to be able to adapt quickly, reproduce quickly, harm the environment, economy, or human health, and they don't tend to have predators, or they need to outcompete a local species. Well, hippopotamus, they're so big that they can cause harm to human health on a small scale. As for changing the environment, they probably would have to adapt to the plants that are around them, but they're still around, and it's been since the 80s, I think. Yeah. Since the 80s, so clearly they're adapting. The biggest thing that would probably reduce their numbers is they don't reproduce particularly fast, because they're such a big animal, and they don't have massive predators. Especially even in Africa, there's not a lot of animals that will eat hippos. So that they may not become a huge problem as far as the predators are concerned. However, that doesn't mean they can't become a problem, because their populations will grow unchecked if they have a suitable environment. Okay. Now, as far as releasing a pet is concerned, we're going to come back to the United States, and we're going to talk about a particular kind of snake that you probably have heard of in the news on and off. Okay. Hi, Sherry. We're glad you're tuning in with us. Okay. So this is Harry, the ball python. We love him. He's wonderful. His species is from Africa, okay? And these guys are super common pets here in North America because they are a very calm snake. They're very, they don't tend to get huge, and they're pretty wonderful. Now, their cousin, the reticulated python, has become invasive in the United States, particularly in the Everglades of Florida, okay? So it became invasive starting in the 1980s. So it's been a problem for a while, but it's been exponentially changing in the last couple of years because they don't have any natural predators. They will eat everything, including alligators. These reticulated pythons are huge, okay? Now, nearly positive that most of those came from pet releases.
There's also a hypothesis, Hurricane Andrew came through, I think in the 80s, I want to say. And it was super detrimental to southern Florida, and there's actually like a python sanctuary that they think got like decimated, from people who had these pythons, who had them as pets, and were responsible, and were like, hey, we don't want this anymore, let's take them to this python sanctuary. And then Hurricane Andrew hit, and it's thought that this python sanctuary got like completely wrecked by the hurricane, and the pythons also might have gotten out that way. It's just one of the theories of how they got to the Everglades in the first place. But
yeah, by the way, for size, Harry here, the ball python, he's adorable, he's lovely, he's like 3.5, 4 feet long, weighs like 5 pounds. Reticulated pythons are one of the longest snakes in the entire world. Like, they can be 20 feet long and weigh hundreds of pounds, like 300 pounds. So this is a serious predator that's now gotten out to the ecosystem. Again, it's a snake, not everybody loves it, but these guys aren't evil. They're not doing this because they're awful. They just are living, right? These animals have found an environment where there's nothing that can eat them, and they can eat almost everything, right? The temperatures of the water are great. It's nice and warm and sunny. There's not really a winter that would prevent this cold-blooded animal from really expanding. They're doing great. So,
and even when it does get colder, so some reticulated pythons have found that in the colder months, they can use or invade burrows of animals that do naturally kind of go underground when it gets colder to stay warm. Oh, no. And so there have been a couple of records of like Florida having super cold winters and there being mass die-offs of these pythons. But they have found that some pythons are like, hey, if I go underground, it's going to stay pretty warm and I'm going to be able to live. And so then those pythons survive the winter and then they reproduce. And then, if pythons are smarter than we think they are, which
Most animals
are. It's possible that that is going to be a behavioral trait that can be learned, passed on through generations, and then you just have pythons burrowing underground and surviving the winter. So there's also that.
So primarily, if you haven't noticed the theme in this whole conversation about invasive species, a lot of this happens through humans. Whether it's intentional, like introducing the cane toads so they can get rid of cane beetles, or whether it's unintentional, like or intentional, like releasing of a pet, or unintentional of a hurricane coming through. Regardless of how it happens, it's often human related. So there's a lot of ways we can actually help with this program. So we have one more animal that's actually super recent in the news that Miss Emily's going to talk about. So I will take Mr. Harry.
Hello, Harry. All right.
Goodbye to Harry.
So there's actually an invasive species that last week and a little bit this week has taken over the news cycle, and I'm sure you've heard of it because they are the murder hornets. And these guys are not as scary as the media is making them out to be. So these guys are technically called the Asian giant hornet. They are very, very big. The reason they are called murder hornets is not because of the damage that they do to humans. They only kill about 50 people worldwide. I think hippos kill more people than that a year. So it's only 50 people worldwide yearly that these hornets injure to the point of death. They're called murder hornets because of what they do to honeybee populations. Now, honeybee populations in the United States are already in decline, and I'm sure many of you guys who are watching this know this. And honeybees are extremely important to not only the ecosystems, but also to agriculture, because they are our pollinators. They are what allow plants to reproduce. And without honeybee populations, we're not going to have a bunch of plant diversity and crop diversity that we need to survive. These murder hornets can decimate entire bee colonies. They come in and they actually decapitate the honeybees, and they can decimate an entire hive within a matter of hours. So that is why they are called murder hornets, not because of what they can do to us. Now, their stings are incredibly painful. I'm not even going to try and blanket over that. It will hurt a lot if you are stung by a murder hornet. And if you're highly allergic, much like, with bees and wasps and everything, you should take your precautions. However, this is not something that everybody needs to be hysterical and super scared about, because they have so far only been recorded in the United States in Washington State and then elsewhere in North America in British Columbia. The reason that it's in the news right now is because this is the time of year when the queens, or the female hive queens, queens, go into their reproductive cycle. And so it's in the news, so people that live in Washington State and British Columbia can be on the lookout for these animals as, the drones and the males and all this kind of other animals of the hive come to reproduce with the queen, so that they know what they look like, so that they can tell the Fish and Wildlife Service or any other governmental animal pest control agency or any of those things that, hey, I think this is a murder hornet nest. Can you guys come and take care of it? So if you guys, live here in Montana or South Dakota or Florida or Maryland, you don't need to go worrying about murder hornets. They're not anywhere remotely close to us at all. Also, please don't go killing any black and white striped or black and yellow striped insect that you see. That's 99.9999999% chance it is not a murder hornet. In fact, it's probably an insect that does important work in the environment that you live in. So many of these animals, while we see them as pests, are really important in controlling other insect populations that we don't like even more, like mosquitoes, or that they are pollinator species and they help plants to reproduce and give us the diversity that we see in forests and gardens and in our crop fields.
Including wasps.
Including wasps. Yes.
It's not our favorite, and yes, you should maybe not have them right by your house, but many wasp species also pollinate almost as much as honeybees do.
Yes. Yes. So that's an invasive species that's currently, running the news cycle right now, but a pinky promise, you don't need to be as freaked out about it as the media is making it super sensational. Shocking. If you want to, make them sound less scary, refer to them as the Asian giant hornet and not the murder hornet. How we name animals has a lot of impact on how we perceive that animal.
Yes.
So maybe try calling them the Asian giant hornet.
Mm-hmm. All right, my friends, so we're going to wrap this up pretty quickly here. We're just going to tell you what you can do. Part of that is the links that are all in our chat here today. We have a link to the National Invasive Species Awareness Week homepage, to the Don't Let It Loose and how you can help with that, as well as, you know, just identifying all these invasive species or just non-native species from the Montana Field Guide. And also just how you can protect Montana's waters, because Montana has one of the last watersheds in the United States, period, that doesn't have zebra mussels in every watershed. So I think it's in western Montana, we don't have any of those mussels yet in large populations. So we can actually help and make an impact there by just making sure that we're cleaning things properly, right? It's not that hard to do. Just find out that information and learn, right? Because if we can learn better, we can do better, right? Now, again, regularly cleaning your camping gear, boats and tires and any other outdoor equipment when you go from place to place, because if there's one plant here and you get the seeds in your tent and then go to another part of the state, then you're helping to spread that, right? So making sure that you clean your equipment.
And especially your hiking boots.
Yeah.
Especially if it's muddy and dirty and gross. Make sure that you scrub those down, especially if you're taking them to, like, not right now, but like going and exploring the outdoors in another country or another state.
Yes.
Especially make sure that you clean them then.
Yeah, and the easiest way to do that is just scrub them off, you know, rinse them a little bit, scrub them off, and then leave them in the sun. Sun and bleach and kill most anything that's on your shoes. You don't have to worry about, you know, damaging your hiking boots, or you can actually find cleaners that can help with that too. Planting native plants in your garden, or even if you have a small porch like I do, you can just put native plants into a pot, right? That helps the local animals a lot, and also helps keep those populations alive. And it doesn't like if you plant something invasive in your yard, chances are it's going to spread outside of your yard as well. So if you can, plant native things into your yard, right? Don't move firewood. So, you know, this is a pretty easy one for most of us. Don't bring firewood in from another place or take it out to another place in case there are emerald ash borers or pine beetles or things like that, right? Which, by the way, pine beetles are native, but it's the changing of the climate that's actually creating a problem with pine beetles here in the Mountain West, okay? Which we can talk about that more later if you want, because I love talking about that. And again, as you probably know, don't release your pet into the wild. Obviously, there's, you know, hurricanes and random things that can happen that can also make that happen, but just releasing your pet into the wild in Montana, most likely that pet's going to die, but there's a chance that it might not, and it could take over an ecosystem. Right?
Bunnies and villains. Yeah,
domestic bunnies are everywhere, and it's bad for them, and it's bad for the local environment, right? If you decide you no longer want a pet, just look up and see what nearby organizations can responsibly take it off your hands. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. The biggest thing is just educate yourself. So thank you guys for watching, because you probably, hopefully learned some things. I learned some things, and I'm supposed to be teaching this. So we really appreciate you guys watching. Again, wanted to remind you, in case there's new people, or just in case you didn't remember from the beginning, we are having a Skype in the Classroom live event on Wednesday, May 27th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. So you can log in as early as 10:30. We're going to talk about animal adaptations, answering fun questions from around the world, and just having a generally good time. So check out our post. I believe it'll be posted about 11:30 or so. For more information, for the link, it'll be super fun. Join us. It's going to be a grand old time. So thank you guys so much for watching today. I don't think we had any questions today, which is totally fine. But we really appreciate everybody who did watch today. This will go up on our YouTube channel as well here soon. So keep an eye out for it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. And we'll see you next time. Next time, by the way, we aren't going to be in the basement. We're going to be somewhere else for our live program. So check us out. See you next week, guys. Thank you. Bye.